Okay, I think we are ready to start. So, hello and welcome. I'm Lee Hopwood. I'm the CEO here at the CCMA, and hopefully, you've had a chance to see some of the online seminars, the member story events, the new good practice guide, and the up and coming training courses that we've got in store for you while you've been waiting. Thank you for joining us. You'll find out all about those events, and we've got loads of insights that we're building on the website. So when you get a minute, please do feel free to go and check those out. But for now, today, I am really looking forward to our research director, Stephen Yap, sharing our latest research into the evolution of the contact centre. And it's thanks to Puzzle that we've been able to do this research. So this is Evolution of the Contact Centre Part 2. Back in the summer, we conducted Part 1, and we identified 6 key trends in the industry. One was being agile delivers results. Home working is here to stay. Number 3 was customer behaviours are changing. I think we're all familiar with that one. Number 4 was the contact centre is forging closer ties with other functions. Number 5 was the changing role of the advisor. And number 6 was contact centres are becoming more strategic. And this was really fascinating. And the feedback we've had was that it's been really helpful to understand what the industry was facing and what contact centres leaders should be really considering when planning and developing contact centres and helping to really work through the challenges that 2020 has given us. So in this part 2, Stephen has led a deep dive into where we are now, and this research has raised some really key questions that contact centre professionals should be asking themselves as we look to 2021 and beyond. So although we are sharing the research today, we really do welcome your comments and questions. So if you do have anything that you'd like to share or that you'd like to ask, please do so in the chat. And the other piece of housekeeping there is obviously you are currently on mute, so please do use the chat and the Q&A area on Zoom to share your thoughts, your views, and also to ask some questions. So in a moment, I'm going to introduce you to Stephen. He will present the research findings to you. Then I'll invite Mark Davies, the Customer Contact Director at Bupa, and Tracy Kellaway, the Director of Consumer Care UK at Estee Lauder Companies. They're going to join me on screen to discuss the outcomes. And it's at this point that I'll be looking to share any comments or questions that you have. So obviously, please do bear that in mind. And then we'll finish the session with some final thoughts from Jonathan Allen at CMO, at Puzzle, who is the CMO at Puzzle. And he's been watching the research really unfold over the recent weeks. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Stephen. So Stephen, if you would like to join me on screen. Fabulous. Over to you, Stephen.
Thank you, Lee. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you joined us for this first session 3 months ago in August, you would have heard a lot about how at that time contact centers were still very much responding to those rapid changes that had been enforced upon us with the advent of lockdown. And we talked a lot about the agility and the ability to transform into remote working and the transformation that had happened so quickly as a result of necessity. It's been only 3 months, but what a long 3 months it's been since that part 1. And a lot has happened in the outside world since August. Our thinking, our planning has evolved accordingly. And my job for the next 15 to 20 minutes is to share with you how our thinking and our planning has been evolving. But first, let me just overview how we actually did this research. So as with part 1 and as we'll do early next year, we did a round of qualitative research. We invited a cross-section of contact center leaders from across a wide variety of different sectors. As you can see here, we've got really a broad array of different kinds of brands, larger organizations, smaller ones, public sector, private sector, a mix of really long established businesses and some relatively newer ones. So a really good look from across the contact center sector. And my thanks to everybody who participated in these two focus groups that we conducted in the last week of October. So we had these discussions 3 weeks ago, so not too long ago. So I think although things are moving very, very quickly, I think the research that I'm about to share with you is still very up to date and very much reflects the way that we're feeling and we're thinking today. So it's been a long 3 months, and in some ways things have moved on since August. In other ways, they haven't. Back in August, life in the contact center was all about managing day to day, week to week. We were all focused on the transition to remote working, making sure that we could cope with sudden increases in customer demand, looking after the safety of our colleagues and making sure that they could work as effectively as possible remotely. And all of that had huge implications to our resource planning and our workforce management. We were dealing very much and living very much in the day to day, and we could barely see beyond next week. And the reality is, as winter approaches and the pandemic continues to grip us, that's still our reality today. It's so difficult to see beyond the next week. And it's very, very few of us can say with much certainty what next year is going to look like. So that's our reality for the near term. So we continue to very much focus on the near term, and we very much continue to manage the changes that are forced upon us in the near term. But what has changed since August is that contact centers are now starting to think more about the long term. So what I'm seeing is contact centers are now planning against two different horizons. We've got two different roadmaps in our mind, in our thoughts, and our strategies happening at the same time. We're still very much locked into that reality of how do we manage things week to week? How do we, as I'll talk about, keep our teams motivated? How do we continue to service our customers as effectively as possible? How do we manage our resources in that near-term uncertainty that is our reality? But our minds are also now very much turning to the new year, turning to what happens in the longer term. And I think many of us are starting to get our heads above the parapet and starting to think in terms of more long-term strategic planning. Let me start off with the near term, which is still very much the reality. And the three themes that I want to, the four themes actually that I want to share here are managing through uncertainty, looking after our colleagues, establishing proper and clearly communicated and consistent flexible working policies, and nurturing the sense of a team and nurturing organizational culture in this new world of flexible working in which we all operate. So I'll start off with that, and then I'll turn my attentions to the longer term, which is all about building better career paths, better opportunities for our staff. And inclusive of that is creating more nuanced skills and aspirations that people can use to measure their progression. It also, the long term is also very much about harnessing the power of customer data. It's a very, very interesting, exciting topic, I believe, which puts the contact center very much at the center of organizations. And indeed, if we take that a step further, contact centers are starting to become a hub for inbound customer experience. So it's a reframing of the role of the customer, of the contact center, and very much putting it at the heart of the customer experience. So really, this is a presentation of two halves, and I'll start off with the first half, which is all about the near term. We're almost at the end of the year. The story of 2020 has been the pandemic, of course, and the story of 2020 has been the uncertainty in which we all find ourselves. We're all living and working during a period of, I would say, probably unprecedented uncertainty, and that's is set to continue. Of course, there's a vaccine on the horizon. It's very exciting and promising news, but realistically, it's going to be 12 months at least before we see anything like life returning to normal. So it's continuing to be incredibly difficult to predict what the future would look like. And all of us at a personal level understand and empathize, I think, with the anxiety that our peers, our colleagues, our teams, and our customers are feeling. We all are in need of more reassurance. We are all struggling to maintain a sense of control in our personal and professional lives. We all need to regain that sense of control. And in times like these, both our customers and our colleagues have turned to the contact center as a place where some of that control can be found, some of that certainty and some of that reassurance can be found. From a customer perspective, it could be as simple as going back to the contact center to ensure that your policies are still in force, or whether there's been any change to terms and conditions. Or it could be getting the reassurance that you've still got the coverage that you signed up for and nothing has changed. From a colleague perspective, when our staff and our colleagues and our team members are, like us, living through this period of anxiety, we turn to our employers, we turn to our teams, we turn to the people around us, our colleagues, as a place where we can find that sense of control and certainty. And what I heard from a lot of our contact center leaders was, while we were working through that initial phase of the pandemic and struggling to just reorientate ourselves and continue business as usual, we might have lost a little bit of that certainty. Without wishing to be too controversial, I think it's fair to say that some of us believe that the public communication around the pandemic has been less than fully consistent, which has added to that general sense of anxiety and uncertainty. What I'm now hearing from many of our leaders is that they have redoubled and renewed their efforts to create that sense of control and certainty, even when the world around is still one of anxiety. The contact center for both customers and for colleagues can and should be a place where you can find that reassurance. And the way to get there is through consistent communication, consistent policies, coherent planning. Perhaps all of the things that some of us think aren't happening in the wider environment, we can make that happen within the contact center. And we need to continue doing that. 2021 is probably going to look a lot like 2020. We've had multiple lockdowns. We're in a lockdown in England, in Wales. They've just come out of their circuit breaker. Scotland is about to enter some parts of Scotland will enter tier 4 lockdown. And in Friday, and no doubt next year, we'll see more of the same. So this will continue to be the environment in which we work. But if we get it right, we'll create an environment which I think is really nicely exemplified in this quote, providing your people and your customers with a level of security and stability that the world isn't giving them. So to build on that, we're 8 months into lockdown, or shall I say the beginning of the first lockdown. We're 8 months into the new world of remote working, and clearly for all of us, signs of fatigue are evident. I don't have to tell you, I think we all have our personal anecdotes and our personal experiences of how challenging it can be. Mental health has very much become top of the agenda since August. Mental health and the topic of mental health. I think one of the great things is that mental health is really on the agenda now. And it's really incumbent on all of us to think about mental health and to continue to be strategic and proactive in the way that we manage mental health. Not just reacting to things when they are become problems, but actually spotting the warning signs as early as possible, which is harder to do than it is to say. I think it's one thing to be reactive when it comes to dealing with mental health, but actually what we should be striving for is how to be proactive and nip it in the bud and identify those warning signs and make sure you have the procedures, the mechanisms, and the means of communication for individuals so that those warning signs, if they happen, can be spotted and acted on early. Flexible working is here to stay. And interestingly, a number of the contact center leaders we talked to had highlighted the idea that perhaps the pendulum has really swung quite far towards the extreme of full flexible working. A number of our organizations came back to work or reinstituted premises-based working in the time between the first lockdown and when the lockdown eased and the onset of the second lockdown in England. Some organizations actually continued 100% remote working and have continued along the way. And what I found really interesting in the conversations we had 3 weeks ago was some people voiced that there is perhaps has been a rapid normalization of the idea of home working, to the extent that now home working is perceived by our colleagues as the default option. And that has created a feeling that actually office-based working now is risky and is not desirable. It's really important that we continue to look after the needs of our individuals and our people first and foremost. But we've got to a point where actually perhaps the pendulum has swung too far, and perhaps we need to challenge this assumption, if it exists, that home working is the only safe and default option. And actually, we need to think about not just the needs of the individual, but we need to go back to thinking about the needs of our organizations, and particularly the job content. There are certain jobs in reality that cannot be as effectively conducted at home as they can be in the organization. For example, when you're dealing with sensitive customer data, it's so much easier to be able to handle personal data if you're working, for example, for a bank or a financial institution, or any type of organization where you're collecting sensitive customer data. All of that just happens so much more smoothly on premises. There are solutions, of course, to do those remotely, but there are cases in which premises-based working still should be the default option. So it's really incumbent on us to think about, how do we balance the needs of the individual with the needs of the organization? And if there are jobs whose content requires people to be in the office, how do we make that work in a way that is both safe but also fair and consistent? Treating people fairly does not mean treating people the same. And we do need to continue to look at every individual on a case-by-case basis, but at the same time have consistent policies that people feel are fair. Something else that's coming through and has come through in the last 3 months is in the lack of consistent policy and the lack of consistent communication. Some people are wondering, well, why is it that I'm being asked to go to the office, but others are being told to stay at home? And it's a very difficult thing to get right, but we have to strive towards balancing the needs of the individual and the needs of the organization, and to do so in a way that's fair and in a way that is consistent. It is a minefield. It is a minefield. There's no two ways about it. It's a challenging one. And I think this will continue to be a super hot topic throughout the course of the next year. A related topic to this is, of course, in the world of remote working, how do we continue to nurture this sense of team? The team, the buzz, the camaraderie of the office is a big reason why many of us show up for work every day, and never more so than in the world of contact centers. If our jobs are now based at home, does that mean that working for one company starts to feel a lot like working for another company? Whomever I'm working for, I'm still at home and in the same place and looking at my screen. And in that environment, how do we continue to create the sense of connection and culture within our teams and our colleagues? And really, those opportunities to connect are at the heart of maintaining culture. Not just planned opportunities, not those scheduled check-ins, but also, and this is where we've moved on, is now we're starting to create platforms and opportunities for those spontaneous opportunities to connect, so that not everything has to be scheduled. One of our contact centers has an open invitation in people's calendars, so you can dip into a breakout room on Microsoft Teams, and you can have a spontaneous conversation anytime you like with one of your colleagues there. So the idea of spontaneity, and just when you feel like it's trying to mimic the idea of the corridor or the water cooler conversation. And you can start to do that with some of our virtual collaboration tools. So those opportunities to connect are so important, because the risk is actually when we're working from home, then a lot of the reasons why people sign up for specific organizations might start to diminish. So that's the nearer term. Now let's move on to the longer term. And as I've mentioned, we're starting to get our heads about the parapets. 2021 is going to be all about managing week to week, but it's also going to be actually thinking about more, what is the strategic opportunities that exist? And there are some very clear and present opportunities. The first one is around building more sophisticated and more nuanced career pathways and talent management protocols within the contact center. One of the few beneficial side effects of the pandemic has been actually, there's never been such a great availability of highly qualified staff. The pool of people that we recruit is really rich at the moment. And also, of course, given the situation, attrition is comparatively lower. But no doubt, once we get the pandemic under control, attrition will be back on the rise, and people will start to want to job hop again. And in the meantime, there's things that we can do to mitigate, and also also things that we can do to take advantage of the great skills and the great talent that we have available to us. So some contact centers are starting to build talent management systems where they are creating skills matrices, creating competency frameworks, where both for soft skills like empathy and for hard skills like product management, we can create levels or grades within that, which then forms the basis of the way that you train people, the way that you recruit, the way that you train, the way that you plan your resources and assign the right people to the right roles, and also creates a really rich and valuable aspiration for progression and pathways and clearly defined roadmaps for progression. And if you can do that, then actually contact center staff start to see where the opportunities are for them in the future, and they can start to see what they need to work towards and start to also benchmark their own progression and see and be measured against their own personal growth. Very, very exciting stuff. And something else that we're starting to see as well is a lot of mobility into the contact center from other parts of the organization. So for example, retail businesses, bricks and mortar businesses, have moved many of their customer facing staff that were working in stores into the contact center because of course the skills are highly transferable. We're also seeing the mobility happening in the other direction. We're seeing more and more contact center staff take roles elsewhere in the organization, to management roles, into business analyst roles. In many ways, the contact center is the best possible training ground that you could have. Whether you take a role in marketing or in sales or in operations, whatever role it is in the future, in the contact center, you're taught you learn to be great with people, you learn the ins and outs of the product, you learn how the organization functions. There's an increasing recognition that people coming out of the contact center are really, really well suited to other roles. And again, being able to position the contact center as a gateway to potentially other types of jobs in the organization is a fantastic way to both mitigate attrition, but also attract great new people into our contact centers. The second really powerful long-term trend I'm seeing is an increasing recognition of the power of customer data. The contact center is the organization's repository of customer information. It's an absolute goldmine of customer information, and those organizations that are getting serious about putting the customer at the center of what they do are putting those systems in place to capture the information in the contact center, to store it, and most importantly, to extract value and insight from that customer data. And there is now evidence from organizations that are doing that their agents are happier because their agents have more customer context with which to work and therefore are able to deliver better customer experiences. There's evidence that those customers who are interacting and have good experiences in the contact center go on to have higher lifetime values, higher NPS scores. You can use analytics, you can use A/B testing to show that customers, here are your customers who have contacted us and had good experiences, here are those customers who haven't contacted us. And contact centers are starting to use those sorts of analytics to actually provide concrete data on the return on investment and the impact that good interactions and good contact center experiences have on things like order value and customer value. And this is going to be a massive trend in 2021 going forward. The idea is that you put the contact center at the heart of everything to do with the customer, and it is that ability to take the data and to learn from it and to activate it, which feeds into R&D, it feeds into product, it feeds into marketing, it feeds into ops. Of course, it's a lot easier if you are a relatively new and digital native organization. It's a lot harder if you are an established organization working with legacy systems. So my final point in terms of long-term planning, if you combine the idea of skills upgrades and upskilling with our ability to generate more and more valuable data and insight about customers, what you end up with is an incredibly strategic organization that becomes crucial to the success and the competitive advantage of organizations. And to do that, and to really unlock the power, we overcome silos. And the organizations that have overcome their channel silos, for example, have started to reframe and reposition the contact center as the central hub for all inbound customer experience. So whether it's happening on the phone, on social, on web chat, it all goes to the same place. It all goes to the contact center. And in doing so, the contact center's influence and relevance to other parts of the business is only increasing. It's not just about solving problems and answering queries. It's about delivering experiences to customers. So I've given you some thoughts. I've given you some themes. I haven't given you a lot of answers, and I think that's okay, because I think actually for round two of our research, it's almost more important as we look ahead to the next year to be asking the right questions. So I'm not going to leave you with answers, but I'm going to leave you with 5 questions that I think are really, really, really important as we think ahead to the short term and the long term. Can you protect your team? Can you continue to provide them with the certainty and the consistency and the control that they need to be motivated, particularly when they're not getting that from the outside world? Can you balance the needs of your individual team members as well as the needs of the organization when you're thinking about resourcing, when you're thinking about flexible working? Can you guard against this idea that remote working is the only way, and actually there is a strong case to be made for premises working, and can you facilitate in those cases safe on premises working? Can you continue to celebrate the values and the purpose and the culture of your organization, even when your organization is predominantly remote working? Can you offer better upskilling and progression pathways, taking advantage of the great people that we're recruiting and making sure that we can retain them, whether it's within the contact center or facilitating mobility to other parts of the organization? And finally, are you capturing customer insight? Are you positioning your contact center as the heart of inbound CX within your organizations and working with other departments, building other relationships with other parts of the organization who would benefit from the intelligence that you gather in your contact centers? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stephen. That was absolutely fascinating. And so, first of all, if I could please ask Mark and Tracy to join me on screen, that would be great. And obviously, really interested in your thoughts for those of you that are listening, and your thoughts, your comments, your questions. Please, again, do use the Q&A functionality. And before I come on to Mark and Tracy, the question that's been raised about whether we're doing anything on Brexit. Yes, we are. 16th of December. Please go onto the website and check that one out. So, Tracy and Mark, there's a lot to take in, I think, from this round of research. But one of the biggest themes that's really coming out this time is the need to offer customers and colleagues more security, especially as we're going into 2021. Where do you think that this is being driven from? And do you think that's the businesses that are driving that? Is it that there's an inherent need to protect customers? Or actually, is there a Maslow's hierarchy of needs need to protect colleagues? What are your thoughts? Tracy?
I think, in this massive, uncertain world that we're living in at the moment, financial, physical, emotional, all of those things, are kind of questions in people's minds at the moment. People are looking for an anchor. So I think it's predominantly being driven by colleagues, but by all of those elements, by the businesses and by the consumers as well. But people are looking for that anchor that says this bit of my life isn't changing, this bit is stable, and I can kind of hook onto that, and I can maintain that normality when everything else is slightly chaotic.
No, that's really interesting. I mean, Mark, you're in a different environment to Tracy. Tracy's with Estee Lauder Companies. It's very much a retail environment. Mark, you're in a service business, and it's a different environment. Where do you think the driver is?
Well, I think, as you said, Lee, I think there's a base level hierarchy, isn't there, about making sure that people, if you can guarantee that they're going to be okay, those assurances, I think, remove that kind of initial fear, which is what most people worry about when they come to work. So I think that's almost a kind of ticket to the game of getting colleagues to be engaged. I do think, though, it potentially is a bit more linked to the customer experience. So I'm seeing within certainly the health insurance sector, and I imagine it's the same for a lot of service organisations, that at a time when there's all this disruption, we realise how heavily we trade on the experience that we can give our customers with our people. So, I have very low levels of digitisation in the company that I work for and the team that I run. We trade heavily on human touch. And actually, I think what we've realised as an organisation is, if I look at our net promoter comments, a huge amount of our promoters promote not actually for the value they get from the product necessarily. It's not necessarily the process that they get, it's the experience they get from that, the advisor. So I think equally then companies commercially will think, even if they're not necessarily as altruistic as we would like, they think actually we need to look after as a company the people that support our customers. So just another thought that's come into my head over the past few months especially.
So how are you doing that? How are you providing that reassurance? What are the kind of tactical, practical things that you're doing?
Yeah. Would you like to start, Tracy, actually? Sorry, after you.
No, carry on.
So I'll kind of kick off. So I think straight away, early on in the lockdown, we were in a very privileged position to be able to guarantee that people would be safe and secure in their job. So we did that early on, which is great. I think beyond that, then the kind of worry levels come to the next point for our colleagues, which is, so what if I can't work from home effectively? What if working from home, which is, we're mandated in the early part of COVID, what if that's not right for me? What if I need that connection with people? What if I need that breakaway from my kind of home life to my work life? So we've been able to open up our offices pretty quickly, actually, from about June, to people that actually need it. Not just because they are absolutely unable to do their jobs physically from home, because everyone we can kit out with a laptop and a system access. But for a lot of our people, we realised that to them, work and the workplace was much more actually than the paycheck at the end of the month, right? For a lot of our people, it was an element of escapism. For some of our people, it represented safety in a more of a physical sense, actually, sometimes, as well as a mental sense. So being able to be flexible, and I think to the points that Stephen was talking about before, adapt to the needs of individual. I fundamentally believe fairness doesn't mean everything is the same for every person. It's about looking at the individual needs. And we've tried our best to do that. I can't say we get it right all the time, but focusing on trying to worry about how we support the individual has probably been our modus operandi.
And it's so one of the questions that we've had come in, if I may raise it and maybe come to you Tracy, it's really tricky offering reassurance and security when so many are at risk of redundancy. Now, I don't know that either Bupa or Estee Lauder are going to be facing that. However, have you got any advice or any tips to share in how you can provide that reassurance and that security, Tracy?
I mean, I think, I won't lie, it is absolutely tough. And, our business is quite diverse in the sense that we've got retail stores where people are facing redundancy and are facing furlough. And then we've got the contact centre where we've got, 150% increase in demand because we predominantly deal with online. So for us, I would say, for the contact centre, the reassurance is there because they can see that the demand is there and they know that the role is, it is very much needed at the moment, and there's a lot of spotlight on what we do. So I think my teams directly are probably feeling quite secure, albeit they can see what's going on in the wider business. So I think potentially for us, it's probably more of a challenge of burnout and attrition than potentially it is around that sort of reassurance of roles. And picking up on Stephen's point from the research, this piece around actually, if I'm going to sit at home and I'm going to work, then I might as well go and work for another organisation because it kind of all feels like the same. So yeah, it's a tough one. It really is a tough one to provide that reassurance when there is so much change, and what you think is certain today may not be certain tomorrow, or can change, very, very rapidly.
Sorry, can I just add to that? Sorry, Lee, I didn't mean to cut across. I think I agree with everything that Tracy said. I think, again, I'm in a very fortunate position at the moment that we're not in the space of redundancies. I think what's important is recognising any business can find themselves in that situation, really at the drop of a hat. The organisation can be affected in ways that it's not being affected now. So just because we're not today doesn't mean we're not in the future. And I think from my past experience of that, I think a couple of things that I would always try and maintain. If that's the case, be honest and be transparent with people upfront, which I think some organisations do sometimes struggle with because there's an element of risk. But really, honesty, I think, and transparency as much as you can is the best policy. The second is, just because organisations are potentially contracting at this point, it doesn't mean that over the next 2 or 3 years they're not going to grow again. And I think if organisations have to let go of really great people, I would really, if I was doing it, I want to make sure I try to do that in the way that was the most amenable and supportive and therefore transparent possible, recognising those people could be future employees of the organisation again, because we're again in very, very uncertain, unprecedented times. So no one really knows what lays ahead of us.
No, I think that's a very good point. And mental health and well-being, it's been a really, really hot topic this year, and I don't see that going away as we go into next year. And I guess that for me, one of the questions I want to ask you guys is, much was done earlier in the year just to make sure that contact centres were supporting colleagues, really supporting them. And I guess that there is, as that has continued, and the pressures haven't gone away, and we start to approach 2021. Is there any learning that has happened, and in terms of what was implemented earlier in the year? Is there that continuous review cycle? What new things are coming out that maybe have been tried and tested, or just new ideas that are coming into the fore? Tracy, what are you doing anything different now compared to maybe what you were doing 4, 5, 6 months ago?
I don't think we're doing anything particularly different in terms of the things that we're offering. I think we're probably doing more, and we're doing it more often. I think the biggest shift for me here has been that it's been okay to say you're not okay. And one of the key things that I've seen differently is, historically in contact centres, when we saw challenges with mental health and wellbeing issues, people would be off or underproductive or have challenges for some considerable time. So long-term absence was it seemed to go hand in hand with mental health. One of the things I'm seeing now actually is much more people being willing to put their hand up and saying, you know what, I'm having a really difficult time at the moment, and I don't need to go off sick for a long time, but I do need some recognition and support. And whether that is, can I not be on the phones for a few days? Can I, be on an alternative task on live chat or email where I don't have to speak to people? Or actually, I just need to take 2 or 3 days short-term holiday to just rest, recharge and reset. I'm definitely seeing more of a willingness, I think, of people to kind of put themselves forward in that way and ask for those kinds of things, not feel ashamed or, unable to ask. And, the business is very much more willing to support those kinds of requests. Whereas, I think perhaps in the past, certainly in our business and in other businesses I work for, it's kind of a, no, if you're not well enough to do your role, you're not well enough to do your role. Well, actually, no, right now, I'm just not able to kind of do this aspect, but I can still add a huge amount of value over here. So I think for me, that's where we've seen quite a big shift. But yeah, and also in terms of some of those practical things, we are probably pushing those a lot more and checking in to see, are people actually, actually hooking up with those. But I think Mark made a really good point in the research and earlier on as well about this piece about spotting early warning signs and intervening. And I still think, that is a crucial sort of point that perhaps we haven't quite all got right just yet.
And if I can pick up on that and actually come to you, Mark, one of the questions we've had come in, for me, it was a huge eye-opener when I suggested with my staff that my staff work from home. I learned that a lot of them were dealing with troubles in their own home life, which I wasn't aware of previously. How should I go about learning everyone's individual situation without trying to pry too much into their home life? Mark, how do you respond to that?
Well, what a great question. And I think it is incredibly difficult to do it right. I think there's a phrase I like, which is, you don't want to tell people you're funny, you want to make them laugh, right? So telling people that we've got an open culture and you can speak to your manager and you can talk about it is lovely, but people won't do it unless they see people role model what happens as a result of it. So I think it's important, in my view, and I had a conversation with one of my frontline team this morning that had raised a concern directly with me, quite actually similar to what you've just described. And I knew going away from that conversation, this person would absolutely have faith that they did the right thing in reaching out. They apologized 3 times, I think, in the 10-minute conversation for reaching out to me. I said, you can't apologize. We're all here to support each other. And I think for me, it's actually the action and what you do with that and putting the colleague first speaks louder. And I guess just to build on that, I guess the single bit of advice I would give, and this is from hindsight learned this time around, as well as obviously previous experience, at times like this, especially if your business is going through sustained periods of challenge where your staff are under a lot of pressure, not only at home, but then at work as well, I think it's important that we do as customer service leaders is really demonstrate that we're putting our people first. And I would go as far as to say as I would put colleagues before customers, right? Which I know is a very controversial statement depending on who you're talking to, but I would absolutely put colleagues before customers. And the lesson I've learned really hard from early in COVID, the COVID lockdown, is it's very easy as a contact center leader to trim a kind of investment time, to reduce the kind of team meetings, to cut the one-to-ones down from 40 minutes to 20 minutes. It is being penny wise to be pound foolish in doing that. So I would say anyone, try and have the courage to stand up to your wider executive teams to say, absolutely, in this sustained period, you're going to put your colleagues first, right? And just dig in. And I'm sure there's lots of empirical evidence that could support people's arguments, but that would be where I'll be very, very passionate. So picking up on the first point, absolutely role model, be transparent with your actions, deliver through on the promises that you make, and make yourself accessible to anyone in your team, irrespective of hierarchy.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. I'm going to move the conversation on a bit, if I may, and start looking at flexible working. It's slightly moved on. Flexible working, it remains high on the agenda. I suspect it's going to be on the agenda now for many years to come. And we started the pandemic with the potential for home working to be the future. I remember that the conversations, why would we ever go back into the office? But as time has gone on, it would seem that thinking has also moved on, and it seems that that there is a greater desire now for people to go back into the office when it is safe to do so. What are you seeing, and where would you expect the contact centre operation to land in 12-24 months' time? Tracy, if I can come to you on that one.
Sure. It's ironic, isn't it, that we've come almost like, done a 180 on this. But, my personal view is I think we will still end up with a blended model, because it does work for some people. I mean, some of the people I've had in my contact centre who have really struggled with productivity and with focus, and have had lots of short-term absenteeism, have turned into some of the kind of best performers and productivity through the roof working from home. So I do think it will be a blended model in the future, and certainly things like some of our less social shifts, the evenings, the weekends, the later things like that will probably be more comfortable for people to do at home. But I think what a lot of people have recognised is this, spontaneous collaboration, and Stephen spoke about it earlier, that we've lost that. Some of the best insights that I get into what's going on in my business, and some of the challenges in customer service I get when I'm making a cup of tea in the kitchen, and I don't get that now. You're in danger with this home working model of things becoming very transactional, where I will contact you and I'll have a conversation with you about something specific, and then that is the end of it and we move on, and you lose those kind of nuggets and things. So I really do feel that blended is the way to go. And I think, again, picking up on Stephen's point from the research, the most important thing there though is that that both business and individuals feel they have some control over that. So it's not all driven by the individual saying, well, this is the model that works for me and that's the end of it. But equally, it's not all driven by the business saying, well, actually, we've decided you've all got to come back into the contact centre and that's the end of it. So how do we find that kind of sweet spot that allows and enables that creativity, innovation and collaboration, but also allows that, those people the freedom to do what they need to do in their personal lives as well and be home when they need to be.
I think that's a good shout. And Mark, I am going to ask you to answer that, but if I can also fold in a secondary question to that, one that's come in on the Q&A. Are you finding that you have to reconsider your model expectations when resource planning? Do the industry standards of shrinkage change due to the need for agile working and the impact on mental health? And that, just thinking about that wider question around resource planning in a flexible environment.
Yeah, I'll try and cover them together actually as response. So I think for me, my simple premise has always been, since the very start, if you can be effective from home, you earn the right to choose, right? As long as we remove the restrictions and people can come into the office and we're not capped as we have been in terms of number of people, if you can be effective, you earn the right to choose, right? So I'd like to give that back to our people to say, it's up to you. However, with a slight caveat that I am not a fan at the moment of having exclusive home workers, people are 5 days a week. And that's not because I'm a fan because I don't like it, it's because I don't think my leaders and managers are equipped and skilled to be able to do that and deal with that, right? They've learned on the job over the last few months, as we all have. It's not something that I profess that we're great at. And what I would worry about is missing some of those signs that you can't see on a two-dimensional screen, even you can't pick up on. And I'm a big believer in connection of people. So I absolutely like Tracy. I like a blended model where people have 2 or 3 or even 1 in 4 where they're at home in the office based on the needs of that person. Yeah, but people led ultimately. I think with regard to the second question, crikey, this is a toughie. And actually, for me, what I've seen is, to answer the question, yes, I've had to rethink about my operating model, but there are some other factors that are less about pure remote working, but more the impact of COVID. So in the early days, we saw quite a lot of lost time because people had connectivity issues, right? Like a lot of organizations, we've ironed those out by rolling out Ethernet cables and making sure people have got the right internet protocols and so on and so forth. So I think, in all things being equal, we'll probably back to net on that, which is great. Yeah. Not to say that we don't have some line issues and connectivity issues, but that's not my big worry point. I think what we're seeing is the impact of COVID is impacting how we're serving our customers. So I think I've shared this with you before, Lee, but I've seen a 10% increase in our conversation time pre-COVID because our customers are curious not only to talk about their lives and their what's going on as part of the rapport building, which is what we encourage. Yeah, so that adds time, but also they want to know about the impact of the service that we offer them based on COVID, right? Certainly health insurance. Am I going to be covered for this? If I go to this hospital, will I get asked to do this? Right? It's added time. So all of that has compounded the pressure on an already stretched workforce. So I think this has changed the landscape for us. Probably not in the way that I maybe thought. Yeah, so I think we've got to a space where we're pretty efficient and effective in terms of the time, but actually some of the dimensions that you use to resource plan have definitely shifted.
Thank you, Mark. So Tracy, I'm going to come to you with quite a big question, and it's one of the last points that Stephen shared on the research, and that's around insight. Now, of course, it's not just people in the contact center that are proving to be invaluable to business. We've also known that for a long time, it's in the contact center where you'll find the rich intelligence about customers. That's very fair to say. And are you seeing a move to better capture customer insights? And I guess more importantly, enable other departments to use that intelligence to improve the processes, products, customer experience out in field? What are you seeing from an insights perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were fortunate enough, I guess, probably about 18 months ago now, to implement a new CRM system that enabled us to really give a level of insight back to the business that we hadn't been able to do in the past. It was very kind of top level in the past about, here's a kind of handful of reasons for people contacting us, but we've been able to get down to a really granular level of detail now, and actually even share verbatim consumer comments back to the board and marketing teams, and pretty much anyone and everything, back to our quality assurance, product development, etc. So we have seen a massive interest in the insight that we're able to pull. And actually one of our successes is that we've been able to show a real demand for a certain product set that's actually led to some of that being brought back, or brought back as a kind of limited archive collection that people then really are very excited to buy. So there's actually some really quite tangible return on the investment that we've made there, in terms of the business actually being able to benefit from that. And it's also helped as well with things like kind of early warning. So, for example, if there is a problem with one of our products or something like that, we're able to spot that really, really quickly through the data and insights that we've got. So, yes, and I think it's enabled us to have probably more of a seat at the table in terms of the kind of CX piece, and actually, particularly in a retail business where we are, sort of half online, half in store, a lot of focus has been on what happens in the stores at the counters. And actually now it's like, customers are calling us and talking to us, not necessarily about the lovely bits of what happens in a store and a counter. So what can we do about that, and how can we help improve? So without a doubt, we've seen some really tangible benefits from that insight, and much more interest from the business in terms of what we can gather.
That's really interesting. And Mark, I have to ask the same question to you from the insights perspective. What are you seeing?
Yeah. So the best innovation I've seen work really well is speech analytics. So we've got we've had speech analytics capability for some time, but we've really dialed it up actually this year through COVID. So able to, we serve about 300,000 customers a month, typically through voice or through chat. And to understand what they're saying and what they're talking about, it's been really, really supportive. So, for example, the stat I talked about before about our handle time going up, I don't mind admitting, my initial challenge was from the board to say the service is under pressure. You're not answering calls as quickly. Why is that? Well, I can see your handle times increased. Are you not managing your team effectively, right? So it tends to be the way that things work. And I'm thinking, well, I think we are, right? So speech analytics then showed that, in 70% of the conversations, we're talking about COVID, right? Well, we weren't talking about COVID 12 months ago. So there you go. So that was really great evidence. Other things like, when we knew customers were concerned about excess, when they were tripping over a policy year where they weren't necessarily able to use their policy because the hospital closed its doors, but they were still paying insurance, really helped to shape the policy that we then developed to respond to that for our customers. So yeah, speech analytics is really cool. And having spent, nearly 20 years in and around contact operations, I've never seen it really used in anger in the way that we've dialed it up. So yeah, I've been pretty happy with that.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Tracy. That's all the time we've got for questions. If I could really appreciate you joining us today, and for supporting the programme as well. Really appreciate that. So, Jonathan, if I may ask you to join me. Jonathan, what are your final thoughts? What's your observations, having observed the research?
So, first up, thank you to Mark and Tracy. I could have listened to them for hours.
I know.
It's amazing, and it's heartening to see that the colleague is at the centre of everything that's being done. I think in terms of the research, two things for me. We talked about on the first one, the fact that we'd accelerated ideas that were already in place. And we talked about moving to agile working. We talked about the changing customer behavior, and about the fact that it wasn't just about voice anymore, and it was about multi-channel. And the fact that those two have almost become standard practice now in a 3-month period is quite fascinating to watch. And you and I talked about this being a diary of an industry or a discipline in change, and it really is. The other one is that came to me when we were talking, when I was listening to what was being discussed today, that I think we're still accelerating what we knew was going to happen. So I think we all knew that it was going to become more digital. We all knew that technology was going to be supporting the colleagues to support the customers. And we all knew that flexible working would come in, but it would have come in over a longer period of time. And what we're seeing is it happening very, very quickly, which means we're bumping into a lot of these issues that we're talking about, mental health and how do we protect people, and we will have overcome them quicker. So I think we'll be in a better place because of the pandemic to actually make that transition as a whole discipline and industry, which is really exciting. And then the other one is around what you were just talking about then, around the importance of the customer data. And you can imagine that, we spend an awful lot of our time at Puzzle thinking about and investing money into how we can connect up those experiences, how we can support the agents through AI, how we can use speech analytics in the way that Mark was talking about. And that becoming a reality in terms of organizations actually recognizing now the power that sits within that data and how it can support the company in their long-term goals is really quite exciting. So, in the short time, it looks like we're running out. Those are the key things for me that came through.
Yeah, no, Jonathan, thank you so much. And I'm with you. We could be talking with Mark and Tracy and with Stephen and with yourself. We could be doing that all afternoon. I think it would be a fascinating conversation. And thank you, Puzzle. Thank you, Jonathan, for supporting the programme. I'd like to say a huge thank you to Mark and Tracy for joining us today. Thank you, Stephen, for sharing the research, and thank you for the questions that you've raised. Really appreciate the interaction and the participation there. We are going to be sharing the research with everybody that's joined us today. The report will be available on the website around about now, so it's there to download. So it just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully you'll join us at a CCMA event really soon. Take care. Have a really good rest of the day.